Yalimudot, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of the Discover Your Path webinar series. My name is Alicia Rahim, and I'm a systems developer for the investment data and analytics team at Connor Clark and Lund Financial Group. I'll be your moderator for today's session on data analytics. So we have three amazing panelists with us here today. We have Sarf, Tahira, and Abhijit. But before we get to them and learn a little bit about them, we have a few housekeeping items. So today's session will be about an hour long. We'll start with a discussion with each of our panelists individually, followed by a roundtable discussion, and then we'll end it up with some questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your control panel. And if you can please specify which panelist your question is for, then we can ask them directly. And if there's any questions we're not able to get to by the end of the session, then we'll try and respond to them after the session. Okay, so if I can ask all the panelists to turn their cameras off, except for Sarf, if you can please keep your camera on. Perfect. So thank you, Sarf, for being with us here today. It's a pleasure to have you. And do you want to introduce a little bit about yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. As you can see on the screen, my name is Sarfaraz Dani, but I go by Surf, easier to pronounce. I'm right now the Director for Business Intelligence at Freshii. Freshii is a Canadian food brand spanned across North America and global. I've been there as a director for 2 years. Purely my responsibilities are around big data analytics. I measure how their products are performing, how their stores are doing, and all other business initiatives, and making milestones and making sure we hit them. Prior to joining Freshii, I spent 3 years working for another Canadian brand, Tim Hortons, in their corporate head office and in a similar capacity where I was looking at big data and analyzing performance of products. I hold an MBA degree from Rockman School of Management, U of T, which I completed in 2015. That's the reason I came to Canada for. And prior to that, I've spent 8 years working in the banking sector in Pakistan. And so I'm an international student. I was an international student here in Canada, and back home, I've completed my master's in computer science and bachelor's from there as well. Thank you.
Awesome. So again, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And like you said, you have many years of experience working, and you have your undergrad degree and as well as your MBA. Have there been any other courses or trainings that have helped you in your career in data analytics? And what kind of skills have you found most useful from your education, whether it's graduate degree or undergraduate degree, and how has that helped your career advancement?
Yeah, so I think data analytics is one of those fields which are still up and coming, and there are no set ground rules on how you approach that. A lot of information that I've learned was during my MBA, doing business case studies and solving business problems that were part of the course. But moreover, it was more the online learning and the YouTubes that get you there. There were a lot of good YouTube courses that I went through. And honestly, it's a learning by doing, understanding, and approaching that ways that helps you the most. It's one of those fields where practice makes perfect, truly. And I would say the 3 skills that have helped me develop myself in this career is, one is problem solving. You're actually on the ground level, you're solving business problems, nothing more. There are questions that you're trying to answer using data. So you make a hypothesis. I feel that this is what's going on in the industry or in my company. You find the right relevant data and you solve that. So it's problem solving. The other big skill that I learned in my computer science background is algorithmic thinking, which is how do you break that problem down into small solvable components. So you might have a very big question that why are company sales down year over year? And that could be driven by multiple smaller problems that are going on in the company. And you need to know how to chop that problem down into different subcomponents and algorithmically solve them. Like, what are the steps I'm going to do to answer this question? And the last and one of the most important skills is storytelling. So data people don't realize it. It's not about building complex models. It's about communicating complex information. So you might have some high-tech model that you build and high-tech analysis you've done, but if you can't answer so what of that problem, it is not useful for anyone. So whenever you approach any problem, in the end, it has to answer for the audience. So what am I getting out of this? What is the audience getting out of this? And why did I do all this work? So those are the key skills that are very useful in this field.
Perfect. And so you mentioned a little bit in the beginning that, data analytics is a growing field. So where do you kind of see the industry going? And, you talked a little bit about the skills, and with that, growing field, are there any skills that you see as kind of emerging that our audience should pay particular attention to? And, maybe if they're, a junior person that is interviewing at your company, what kind of skills would you look for?
Okay, so this is again an evolving field. So right now it's an 80-20 rule. A lot of the work is done 80% in Excel and simple data modeling, like doing basic statistical analysis, and that answers 80% of business problems. The other 20%, which is emerging and which is becoming a bigger subset, is something called deep learning, artificial intelligence, machine learning, those buzzwords. And I think that's where you're actually, in simple words, training machines to do what we are actually doing. So you are making machines that can do what a data analytics person is doing manually. So I think that's an emerging field. To get into that, it is very important that you should have some programming skills, because you need to use programming languages like R and Python to develop those models. And then you need to be interested in STEM fields. When I say STEM, it's like mathematics, computer science, and technology, engineering. Those fields give you the right background, because it's a field that's at the intersection of mathematics, statistical learning, and business. So you need to know the basics and use that in your work. So it's very important that you're a technically sound person. You have math skills, you have statistical analysis skills, things like that. The other important skill is communication. So you have to be very crisp, clear, because you're going to be dealing 95% of the time people who know nothing about the data. They're just there to know the answer. If you take them through the whole process of data understanding, it's not useful for them. It's more the answer that they post to you, the problem they wanted solved. They need the answer to that, and how you got there in a very generic way that they can understand. So when we are recruiting junior employees in this team, we know that they don't come with a deep technical skill set, because that is mainly learned on the job, but we want the right attitude, aptitude, and communication skills. So they need to have the basic attitude that they're going to come in a field which is ever evolving, and they have to have a lifelong learning process around it. They need to have the aptitude of maths, statistical analysis, computer science, programming to jumpstart their career, because without that, they don't have the right foundation. And then the communication skills, because in the end, it's about facing executives and giving them answers to business problems. So you need to be very, very good at your communication.
Perfect. And yeah, I think like you said, it's very important. I think a lot of people miss that business aspect and that ability to explain things, right? So it's really not just the technical skills. And like you said, a lot of people, in fact, think the opposite, where technical skills can be learned on the job. So I think that's a really important point. And you mentioned at the very beginning in your intro that you actually started your career in Pakistan and then you moved here, right? So I'm sure many of our audience members are also international students coming from, all around the globe. Do you have any advice or any tips that can help them navigate that transition, or even how you navigated that yourself?
Yeah, so when I came here, it was kind of a culture shock for me. Back in Pakistan, when I was used to work in banking, I used to do business risk, business strategy, operational excellence, operational risk, a lot of, roles that were combined into my role, and I was jack of all trades. Canada and the US market doesn't work like that. You need to specialize in a particular area. Like even in data analytics, there are multiple facets to it. You need to pick one of the facets and you need to become a specialist in that. That is the only way you make progress in this field. You need to pick your niche. Other skill that I found useful as part of my MBA was networking, talking to the right people and opening those lines of communication where people can tell you where the industry is heading, because you will enter the industry 1 year, 2 year, 3 year down the road where it's going to evolve a lot. So you need to stay in touch with the industry experts to see what is going to be useful, not now, but 1 year down the line or 3 years down the line when you actually enter the industry. Campus recruitment is that's how I landed my job at Tim Hortons. Campus recruitment is really useful. But again, when you go to these undergrad schools, especially in North America. I don't want to take a shot at them, but when you enter them, they have these clubs and they focus you on investment banking or very high skilled jobs. You need to open yourself up to other jobs that are out there in the industry, because I came from banking. I could have gone to banking, but I went to Tim Hortons, which is a food brand. So you need to diversify to open those avenues for yourself up. So when you're doing campus recruitment, don't be very picky about 4 or 5 companies and 4 or 5 roles you want to go into, explore. And lastly, data analytics is not useful at all if you don't know about how the business works. So I struggled for the first year at Tim Hortons. It's a personal story. I really struggled because I didn't know their business. I came from banking. I knew nothing about how the food business actually works. And just I would analyze data and I would come up with results that were kind of useless because they weren't making business sense. Like I was correlating things and making inferences just based on data which didn't make any sense in the real world. So that business acumen piece is very important. So any field you're entering, if you can get into a rotational program that exposes you to how the business works in the beginning for the first couple of years, and then you move to data analytics, that's very useful because then you can connect the dots, as you might say.
Yeah, nobody likes a bunch of graphs that don't actually tell them what they want to know, right?
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarf. We'll catch up with you again in our roundtable. So if I can ask you to please turn your camera off, and Takira, if I can ask you to please turn your camera on. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, Tahira?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me today. This is, I think, a really great session that you guys are doing. So currently I'm a senior manager at Deloitte Canada, specifically in our Deloitte digital team, where I'm one of the leaders in our front end engineering practice. But my focus over the last 10 years has really been financial services and public sector. Currently I'm working, mostly with Canadian banks, but also the various provinces and federal government as it relates to COVID related solutions. But one of the great things about Deloitte is I've been able to work on various engagements, companies, industries. Over the last few years, though, my focus has really been on helping financial service companies bring new revenue streams to light, and a lot of that is through the digital field. But actually, prior to joining Deloitte, way back when I started my career, I grew up in the US, and I actually started in banking in New York, which really gave me a great foundation, and used that experience and moved into a boutique consulting firm where I was able to really hone my financial services skills with a consulting skill set that then allowed me for my career at Deloitte.
Well, it's great to have you here. So, since you mentioned about your career at Deloitte, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that experience? And, you work in digital transformation. So if you can explain kind of what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, for sure. So, Deloitte, although my area is very tech focused, it obviously has a realm of opportunities. And my experience specifically has allowed me to use, kind of what starts like you have to have that business acumen and that communication side. And so it's allowed me to really take what I learned when I was on the business side and apply it to the technical side and bridge the two gaps. And I've noticed that, although my focus is FSI and public sector, I've been able to actually do that across multiple industries, which keeps things really interesting. And then in regards to digital transformation, at its core, I think the easiest way to really explain digital transformation is about taking what you have and adopting it to use digital technology. So really essentially transforming your services, your business to be more digital, get away from paper process, manual process. There is also a really big human component to that. And that's kind of the area I really spend my time, but there is a big part of the human experience that comes along with that. And so for those out there that might be wondering, how does front-end engineering align and even having to do with data analytics, it's really, from the engineering side, we're building and putting together the thing that you see, the thing that you use, whether it's an app or a web page, et cetera. But the data is actually the enabler for what you're able to see. So I think the two really have to work closely together to actually provide something that's not just giving you meaningful data, but also in a way that's easy to use.
Yeah, and again, if it's not easy to use, it kind of the product is not worth very much, right? So
Exactly.
definitely very important. So what is it like, as a woman in business? And I understand that you're involved with a lot of issues of equity and gender equality. So do you think people of color and women are moving the dial?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, a touchy subject for a lot of folks. I think as a woman in business or a female in business, there are definitely stereotypes. And I think a lot of those stereotypes have just been there over time and they haven't changed as rapidly as we might expect. But what I have seen over the last couple of years is that they are starting to change. I think, and it's both because women are saying, no, those stereotypes don't apply to us anymore and we're different and we want different things. But also our counterparts and our colleagues and our male colleagues are saying, we are actually understanding and valuing your opinion to be equal to ours, right? And I think it's changing on both sides. I think the needle has moved. I do think there's a long way to go, especially as it comes to minorities. And again, I think a lot of that comes back to there are specific stereotypes that people have that we just have to break through. But the more that someone who's a minority or a female is able to work their way up and be in that position to actually empower and enable others, the more I think we're moving the needle. And I think it's just important that as you are getting, for everyone out there, as you're getting to those positions, remember where you came from. Remember, everyone had help at some point. Try to pay it forward. Enable the people who are coming up behind you. I think a lot of people forget that when they get to a more leadership focused position, that they probably had help at some point too.
Yeah, I think it's definitely good. And I know I've certainly been helped by people who've, kind of come up before me and have helped me get up there too. So definitely really important. I'm very thankful for that as well. And in your undergraduate education, you were very active with a lot of extracurricular activities. So can you speak to the importance of getting involved in those extracurriculars while studying, and what exactly did you gain from having those? And did it help you in your career at all?
Yeah, so I can't say that it helped me in my career a ton, if I'm being completely honest. I think when I went from my undergrad into my first job, it helped because it gave me something to talk about outside of just my studies. It gave me another way to connect with the people I was interviewing with, because a lot of times you interview not just with the person hiring or someone who's a leader, but you might also interview with people who could be your peers, or your direct manager. And so it did give me more things to talk about, which was great. But where I think extracurriculars can be really positive is two areas. One is it gives you something to do outside studying. And I think it kind of pushes you to think about, what are you interested in? It could be a sport, it could be something different. But take that time and explore it. Maybe it's something you only do while you're in high school or you only do while you're in university, but it was something that you really wanted to explore. Or maybe it's a way that you take what you're studying that you may or may not really enjoy, but apply it, right? Because applied learning is always really important. But the other things I think you can gain from extracurriculars are things like networking, teamwork, being a team player, leadership skills, things like that, where those can be important in a job interview because again, you can pull examples. But I would have to say after my initial job, no one really asked me about those, but I think I learned a lot from those extracurriculars that I was able to kind of take with me along the way.
Perfect. And do you recommend that, up and coming students in their first undergraduate degree who are maybe looking for a way to get into their first job, that they also participate in those extracurriculars?
Yeah, I do, because again, like, you can learn a lot about yourself, but you can also use it as a way to show your potential employer, yes, I understand the importance of teamwork. Here's an example. Or I understand, the importance of the skills it takes to be a leader. And like, here's an example, or here's something I did that really showcased that. But the other way, and something that we've looked at when we've hired individuals, is a lot of times people say, I'm interested in X, but they don't actually have a way of showing you that they're interested in that. And an extracurricular activity can be a really great way to do that so that you can talk about something you're interested in with actual proof behind it versus just, using buzzwords or whatever you think that potential employer wants to hear.
Yeah, perfect. And I think, it's often overlooked to put extracurriculars on your resume or talk about them in interviews.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a really good point that, we shouldn't be scared to do that, and we should actually encourage it to talk about that and build that relationship. So
Absolutely.
perfect. Thank you so much, Tahira. So we'll catch up with you again also at the roundtable. If you can please turn your camera off. And Avijit, if we can get you to turn your camera on, please. And if you can give us a quick introduction about yourself and your background.
Sure. So thanks as well for having me. My name is Avijit Sarkar. I go by Ab. I've been going by Ab since kindergarten, and I'm the founder and CEO of TypeSift. And we're a reporting, planning, and analytics technology startup here in Toronto. And we're changing the way companies build analytics and business intelligence teams internally. My background is actually in engineering. I studied mechatronics engineering at the University of Waterloo. I had primarily a software focus, so a lot of my jobs and my experience has been in software. And I eventually came to the data space when I lived out west in Vancouver, working for a company called Arc'teryx, which I'm representing right now, which you guys may know. I joined their software engineering team back in 2011, moved into their business intelligence team, and I actually worked with a group of wonderful people to build out their data and analytics infrastructure. Eventually left that job in 2015. I had an idea for a product that I wanted to build that eventually became TypeSift. And I did the classic startup thing. I moved home, moved into my parents' not the basement, but my old room. And I started hacking away at this product. And within 6 months, took it out to the market and landed my first deal. And that has brought me to where I am today.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And, it's always nice to meet a fellow Waterloo grad. I think, seeing someone from the same university is always good. And you mentioned, you're a successful entrepreneur, right? And, of course, Waterloo. So we'd expect nothing less, right? But can you tell us a little bit about the pros and cons of working for another company versus working for yourself?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that there's any pros and cons to one or the other. It's really what you as a person need and what you prefer. Obviously, if you work for another person or another company, there's a lot of stability, a lot of predictability. You know exactly when your next paycheck is coming in, and there's a lot of structure and stability there. So if that's something that you need, especially if you want to balance, have a steady work-life balance, that's probably the best place for you. That being said, you can kind of switch your brain off at the end of the day and come home, but you do have a limit to how far you can go in your career. When you start your own business, you're working for yourself, but you're also working for far more bosses. You have your customers are your bosses. It's way less predictable. There's no structure, and you can't switch your brain off at the end of the day. But if you're one of the few that make it there, all the rewards are essentially your own. So it depends really on your personality and what you're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good point, right? Everyone has their own thing that they excel at. So I think it's a really good point that, it really depends on the person. And I understand you have your CFA, which is amazing. And how exactly does that relate to your work in data analytics at TypeSift?
So it actually, to my own surprise, it related quite a lot. I'll build on something that Surf had said earlier, that business acumen is extremely important when it comes to data and analytics. When I moved into the business intelligence, part of my career, I was coming from software and engineering, and they don't really teach you anything about business in an engineering program, apart from taking that Econ 101 course. So there was a lot of, I was sitting in a boardroom with my director of IT, one of my colleagues who was on my team, and the CEO of the company. And I had never sat in a meeting with the CEO until I had taken this job. and they were talking about all kinds of things that I really did not understand, all kinds of business terminologies and just how the company worked. And I was like, well, I can get you the data and I can build you the algorithm, but I really don't know what any of this means. And I realized that was a huge gap in my skill set and in my career. So I was trying to decide if, I wanted to do the MBA program or not, and I wasn't too sure. My sister, who actually works for TD Securities, she herself is a CFA charter holder, and she encouraged me to pursue the charter myself, mainly because it had a strong data and analytics portion as well, and that's where I was trying to go. So that was kind of the carrot that got me into the program, and what I ended up benefiting far beyond that because of just the business acumen that I developed with it. So I use that consistently in TypeSwift all day, every day. Especially my work primarily consists of speaking with CFOs. Those are usually our clients, and so I need to be able to speak their language, and I draw on the CFA charter all the time for that.
And I suppose so having that, even as a business owner really helps you communicate with other companies and other high level executives. Is that right?
That's definitely true. Yeah.
Perfect. And what are the top 3 skills that you would suggest for someone if they're looking to have that entrepreneurial mindset?
So I listed 3 things here: tenacity, grit, and perseverance. But if you look closely, these 3 skills are actually just one skill, which is don't give up. It is tough. It is really tough. And you will have all these incredible highs. You'll have these, very dismal lows, but, it's a matter of sticking it through. Bruce Croxon, who I think he used to be a dragon on Dragon's Den, is an entrepreneur himself and is now, I think he's the founder of Round 13 Capital. He gives this advice, which I give to every other entrepreneur, which is just keep going.
Perfect. And in the interest of keeping going, if I can ask all the other panelists to turn their cameras back on for the roundtable portion. So we have a couple questions, and these questions are open for any of you to answer. So we'll start with our first one, which is, how have you seen the industry change in the last 5 years, and where do you see it going in the next 5 years? So maybe we'll start with Tahira, if you want to go ahead.
So I would say where I really see the industry going over the next 5 years, and I think, Sarf, you kind of touched on this in your section, is a lot about automation, AI, ML, I would say more that deep tech. Where I see the world really going is data driven. And I think data is just really going to continue driving things as we see it and as we know it. And people will start to rely on data driven decisions more than they have in the past. And I think that's also, not just as people are learning to do things differently, but just the technology that we have available to us and that we're going to continue to expand on will make that necessary.
Perfect. And Sarf, do you want to add to that or add some different opinions?
Yeah, so I would say that 5 years ago when I was starting out this field, it was more about just doing basic statistical stuff like what is the average of 20 numbers or 50 numbers that you see in front of your screen, and how do you relate that to the business. Now it's more like, how do I teach a machine that when my customer is on my website clicking some products, what is he thinking and what is he going to buy next? So it's like going to that next click and you see that recommended list in front of you that you may like these products or these movies. That's where the world is heading to. It's all about predicting the future, and data engineers are making that, you can say, that value for businesses is making those informed decisions before even the consumers realize that they want those things. They're being presented in front of them. I think that's where the industry is heading, and it's a very exciting time for the industry itself.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to push this in a totally different direction. I think that processing power is increasing. Computers are getting smarter and stronger, and companies are amassing more and more data all the time. So I think what's going to become really, really important in the next 5 years and beyond is data stewardship, privacy, ethics, all that kind of stuff. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities around defending kind of people's rights around the use of their personal data.
Yeah. And how do you think that would affect you as kind of a data analytics perspective? If you get, let's say, barred from using certain types of data, is it possible to work around those, or does that kind of just pose another problem that you have to solve?
I guess that's a question for me or for everyone in general, but I'll just kind of kick it off. I don't think we'll ever be barred from using data. It's impossible. We've kind of opened the door at this point, and it's the way that business is done now. You can't go back. It wouldn't be possible. I think that it would be a good thing to implement safeguards and regulations and these kinds of things. It's happening now. You see it with things like GDPR and protecting PII and these kinds of things. This is a step in the right direction, in my opinion. It's important to protect people's data privacy, and we'll work around it. I mean, you kind of just have to work with the systems, and it'll make it better for everyone, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, it's definitely good to hear. I'm sure we all in the industry want that, data is not going anywhere, right? It's always going to be around in some form or another. So definitely good to hear that. So changing streams a little bit, are there any special programs or technical skills that you find are very much in demand right now?
I can take that. So I was a computer science grad and I moved into banking and spent most of my life in banking. If I can go back, I would stick to my computer science roots. I would be very strong at programming and mathematical skills, which are very important in this field to succeed. And if I was a student again, I would focus more on those technicals first and building my communication skills side by side. I think those two hand in hand give you a platform that is very competitive in this space. Now, this space, you need to remember that you're not competing with only data analytics professionals. You're competing with every other science student that is there. They're engineers, they're biochemists, they're physicists. Everybody is very grounded in programming and data skills. And all these people are entering the business sector as we speak in data analytics, especially because that's their into the business. So you're competing with those techies. So you need to create that edge where you bring in the business acumen and communication along with those technical skills to make you a full-fledged product for companies to hire.
Perfect. Tahira, Abhijit, do either of you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think the one thing two things maybe I would add is understand where you really want your focus to be. I think there's a place for generalists and there's a place for people who are down a specific path, and I mean, there's a place for both of them. But if you look at, as sort of like the competitiveness of the landscape, being able to be a real expert in one area and get to that point can be super helpful. But I would say in relation to that, also being able to be adaptive, because you might be really great at one thing and maybe there aren't jobs out there that relate to it, or that perfect role that you want. But if you can take what you know and your ability to learn and be adaptive, I think you can go really far with that as well.
To be honest, I didn't even know there was a data and analytics industry when I was in high school. I don't even think it really existed. No, it wasn't a thing back then. So for me, I really didn't, apart from knowing that I was going to go into engineering, it wasn't very clear to me kind of where I was going to go and what I was going to do until I found this industry, the business intelligence industry, which at first glance, at the surface looked kind of boring. I didn't think it was going to be that interesting. And then when I started doing it, I was like, this is my thing. This is my calling. So I would say that no matter what my advice is, the world that we live in today is going to be totally different in 10 years. Just try to be open about, the opportunities you take and be open-minded about where you go. I almost passed on becoming a business intelligence analyst, and it was actually a mentor and manager of mine who convinced me to take the job, and it completely changed my life. So my advice would just be open, and be open, collaborative about it.
Perfect. And you talked about a little bit of advice, but are there any skills or anything about the industry or career in general that you wish you knew as a student and would maybe pass on to students that are just getting into the industry now?
One thing I wish I knew was how rapidly things change. What was popular when I was a student is not necessarily popular now. Or there were like subjects I really, really enjoyed in university, but didn't think I could parlay any of those into a career. And so I didn't. And now those things are actually very popular careers. And I wish I had known that then, that if I had just stuck to things that really grasped my interest, you know, I could have taken that in a totally different direction.
Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I would say special programs or technical skills. If you're in high school or if you're still in your schooling years, I would say focus on mathematics and statistics and honing your programming skills. Programming, you can see like the founder of Shopify, founder of Facebook, all these people started their programming careers very early. They were first programmers, like Ab spoke as well. Ab also started early in this field. You need to be a programmer first, and you need to develop that aptitude of algorithmic thinking and programming, which should come naturally to you. So I think those technical skills are special programs. Like I know, like there are coding programs for high school students where they're developing games and they are developing, you know, softwares, which are very critical for your kids to learn these days. I think push your kids, if they're interested in this field, to learn those skills. They're very useful. They can get them to university programs, especially. And then if you want to really focus on your undergrad, take a kind of a technical field. Even if you're an economics student, take the econometrics courses very seriously and learn data analytics in economics, data analytics in engineering, and those courses. There are programs out there that present case studies and problem solving skills. Take those classes, and that's how you develop yourself. It's more about that mindset. Once you have that thought process, then you can say any transition that comes in the industry, you can naturally adapt to it because your brain functions that way. So it's like kind of saying like once an engineer, always an engineer. That's kind of the thinking you need to be in. And once you develop that thought process, it's much easier if I give you a new programming language or new, you know, Azure server or AWS or anything kind of like that. It's easy because your core concepts are there.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've seen that a lot, especially with, you know, different computer science or coding languages, right? Once you know one, you can easily learn and pick up another one. As you mentioned, even sometimes on the job, right? You interview for a company not knowing the language and you learn as you go, right? So it's definitely an important skill. And like you said, while you're young, it's really important to pick these up, particularly coding. So if we can move to the next slide, I'll actually open that question up to everyone else. Is there anything else that we'd recommend for students in high school or university if they're interested in getting into data analytics?
I would essentially agree with Sarf and just build on what he said. My 6-year-old niece is already learning how to program. So it should be reading, writing, arithmetic, software development. I think that that's going to be such a critical skill. Even if you never end up using it again, if you go into something totally different, maybe you go into the ballet. I don't know. I think you should still learn how to do some kind of software development. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to keep up. Things are changing so fast.
Yeah, definitely. I know for myself, you know, going into even high school and even university, computer science was kind of just starting up. People were just learning to code. And now I talk to young kids, like you said, kids as young as 6, and they're already, you know, full-blown programmers, basically. They know exactly what they're doing. So it's great to see that. Tahira, do you have anything that you want to add on this?
Yeah, I mean, agree with all points already made. So I think the one thing I would just add is, in addition to programming and like mathematical skill sets, is also just honing your critical thinking. I think sometimes people get bogged down in understanding how to do something very step-by-step and sequential, but if they can't actually take that and apply it to something a little more out of the box and use their own thinking, then I think that becomes a problem.
Yeah, and are there any suggestions from anyone on how students can improve those critical thinking skills?
I would say it's a more practice thing and learning by doing. The more they are, it's first about being interested. Like if you either be a data science person or you're not. If you're, like Ab said, if you want to be a ballerina or a violin player, then this would never interest you. It is about practice. It's about being in front of the computer or being in front of the laptop and, you know, honing in those skills from an early age, which makes you perfect. It's the 10,000 hours rule that Malcolm Gladwell talks in his book. And he talks about Bill Gates and the founders of Microsoft. And he says that they spent 10,000 hours to hone their programming skills. And when they came out, when they graduated, they dropped out and started Microsoft rather. They were such professionals and such experts in their field that nobody could catch up onto them. So I think it's starting at an early age, but you need to be interested in the field itself. Just don't enter the field just because it pays well, or it's the up and coming field, or it's the new fad to be in, just like once chartered accountants were or doctors were. If you're not interested, it's very important to be interested, because here you're not just competing with data scientists, you're competing with all the engineers out there, and there are a ton of engineers. Trust me on that.
To build on the honing your critical skills piece, you know, we sort of learned this in a trial by fire approach in engineering, where you have to hone your critical thinking skills. Otherwise you won't graduate. So the way that you do that is you teach the engineering problem solving method. You just take the problem, break it all the way down to the base parts, understand every single part, and then figure out how to put it back together again. And at the bottom, when you look at those base parts, you'll start to see patterns emerge. Typically, you know, they're called mental models. If you Google mental models, that's what you're going to come back with. And understanding how to recognize a problem is, you know, which mental models are basically composing that problem. If you can figure out that skill, it'll take you very, very far.
Perfect. So is there anything else we wanted to say? We're going to move into the Q&A portion, but before we do, I just want to open it up and give everyone a chance if there's anything they wanted to add before we start asking questions from the audience.
So one thing I would want to add is that data analytics is a very new field. So a lot of people are entering mid-careers. That's what I did as well. When in Pakistan, I never did data analytics. I entered it when I was more like 35 in my MBA, and I entered the field. So it is one of the fields that there's no age to enter, but the route certainly gets harder when you're older, and you need to catch up, because then you are in your mind competing with a 20-year-old or a 17-year-old who is crunching numbers on his laptop like an expert, and you're competing with those people. So it's difficult, but it's doable.
Perfect. Okay, so let's go do some questions from our audience. So we have one, if we could give an example of how engineering gets applied to a data analytics role, and can one get into this field of data analytics without specifically an engineering background or engineering education?
Okay, so I can tackle a bit of that. So when it comes to data and analytics, I always think of it in two categories. There's the analytics portion, and then there's the engineering portion. The engineering portion, which is what I actually specialize in with TypeSift, is all about the data plumbing. How do we take data out from all these different places? How do we put it together? How do we clean it? How do we make it fast and responsive so that the folks on the analytics side can actually use it to, you know, drive decisions? So it depends on which category you want to go into. If you want to go into the more data plumbing side, yes, an engineering degree, in my opinion, or a computer science degree, in my opinion, absolutely necessary. You won't be able to solve those problems without that kind of foundation. I think the analytics side is a bit more open-ended, and you can have people from all sorts of backgrounds coming to that. You know, I've seen people with a PhD in physics, you know, coming to the data science role, or people with an economics background or with a marketing background. That's more so, you know, focusing on being able to understand the business, find patterns, be creative, communicate effectively. These are all things that are more so, I'd say, on the human side, whereas the other portion really does require a strong engineering aspect.
Perfect. And so now you all come from very different backgrounds, and you all pursue data analytics in different ways. Since it's a very fluid area, are there any university programs in particular that you would have pursued if you were, say, starting out right now?
If I were to talk about graduate programs, I think Ryerson runs a very good data analytics program. They're one of the key founders, and Ab would vouch to that he's from Ryerson DMZ. They run a very good data analytics shop and a very good data analytics postgraduate programs. Otherwise, there are a lot of universities focusing on this program now, Stanford, Harvard, and the big Ivy Leagues, as well as a lot of programs in Canada, like University of Waterloo has a program, Ryerson, U of T. So there are many programs out there. Again, in this field, where you went to school only gets your foot in the door. So it might allow you to land your first job. But it's, again, how much committed you are and what you bring to the table in terms of problem solving skill takes you the long way. So you have to have that aptitude, and you know that approach to problem solving that takes you long way, rather than just going to those programs.
Perfect. And so we have a question here. If you have an engineering science background and would like to go into data analytics, would you recommend going back to school?
I mean, I think the way, Abhijit, like the way you answered the question, I think it kind of depends on what camp you're in. Like if you want to stay in that engineering side, then you likely don't need to. But if you want to go more on the analytics side, I think it would depend on which piece within that are you interested in and are new skill sets required. And even then I would say you may not even have to go back and get a full degree. You might just be able to take some training courses to get you up to speed in whatever that may be, versus going back to university or going back for, a master's degree, et cetera.
Yeah, so there is a clear distinction between data engineers, that what you can say Ab specializes in. He's a data engineer by profession. And then there are, data savvy people who can, answer those questions. What does the data mean? And what does this mean in the real world? So they are the problem solvers. So that's where my space is. Like, I don't have a great programming background. I left programming 12, 13 years ago. During my MBA, what we learned was problem solving. So using data, using those results, because at the end of the day, there are softwares out there that you can push the data in and they can give you the results. But to understand what that result means and how that gets applied to the real business problem, that's the whole different aspect where you don't need a real technical skills for. You need to just know what the basic data means, and then you can take it and use your business knowledge to excel in the field. That's why you'll see a lot of executives are not programmers per se in the field still. There are a lot of people who are chartered accountants or lawyers or non-engineers or business people who lead these teams, because they know the business, how it works, and they can use that business to use the data to solve those business problems. I think that's the aspect where you can really excel in.
Great. And so we have here a bit of a more technical question. So how does one ensure that the data is good before it's analyzed? So specifically to avoid the whole problem of garbage going in and garbage coming out.
This is my whole life, is answering this one question. There's a lot of, so look, there is no AI out there that's going to do this for you. And I don't think that there's going to be an AI out there that can do this for you, at least not for the next 50 years, in my opinion. So it does require a human being going in and looking at, what does all this data mean that's coming from different places? How do we consolidate it? How do we get it all to agree with each other? There are tools and technologies that help make this task easier. That's what we do, is we build these tools to make the task easier, so it's not completely manual. But it still comes down to a human being, kind of looking at the sources of data, making sure sometimes it's basic things like fixing spelling mistakes in product names. It can be that basic, and other times it can be way more complicated, like under what conditions do we use which exchange rate. So it's very fluid, and I would say rely on technology to make the manual parts easier, but you still need a human brain to kind of work through it all.
Great. Yeah, Tahira, Sarf, did either of you want to weigh in on that? I know it's a pretty broad question.
Yeah, so so I work closely with AB, and we implemented those business rules that AB automated that now filters the data. So when you look at the data, there are many things which are, you need to apply basic statistical analysis to make sure that the data makes any sense. So there are the outlier analysis, the standard deviation analysis that you conduct, and there are prescribed methodologies that you can look at the data and apply those rules, and you can get the results and clean that data. So that's something that we learn in school. There are different tests out there that are automated, that you just plug the data in a software and it will tell you that this data complies to all the data rules or not. And it's something right now, a lot of people use it as a black box because there's so many models out there that do that. We don't even read or learn all those. We use softwares to implement those business rules, and they do it on their own. So the cleaning data is becoming easier and easier with a lot of software, off-the-shelf softwares that are out there. But again, you need to know what business rules make sense, and you need to be able to, at the end of the day, but that's where human interaction comes in. You need to look at the data and say, does this answer make sense? Are these two things related or not? And can I make some business sense out of it? Because many times correlation between data is just a byproduct of running variables.
Perfect. And so this next question, I think we touched on it a little bit, but we'll ask it in a bit of a different way. And Sarf, I think it was you who asked the question. So if a person is already in the middle of the career and they wanted to change focus on data analytics, what would be the starting points to help them gain ground quickly? And I think this is in reference to what you mentioned about how younger people are coming up and they already know a lot. And so they're asking in terms of professionals already in the industry or in a different industry, how can they catch up with those students who have been doing this for many years?
There are a couple of approaches I would say you can take to enter the field. One is you can go back to school and go take an executive program. So UFT has a School of Continuing Studies. Ryerson has an executive data analytics program. So what you do is you enroll in those programs and they train you from scratch. They take you in knowing that there would be certain skills that you're missing, and they'll fill those gaps. So they'll teach you those technical skills. Again, that requires a lot of commitment on your part, and like Tahira mentioned, you need to be adaptable to the changing world. If you need to be open to learning those skills. The other thing is that there is a lot of courses online. So like if you go to Coursera's website, or you go to Stanford's website or Harvard's website, there are free courses and there are free certifications that can train you they can cover a lot of ground in 6 months. So they can teach you programming, they can teach you statistical analysis, and within 6 months you have a certification, you have a boot camp, and you do a certain projects, and you have the foundation laid out. Now, the only problem with people in mid-career level is that they might have to start from scratch. So you might have to take a hit in your career, like in a case I did as well when I moved here. You have to start from scratch. You have to take a junior position. That means taking that time to, again, develop yourself into a data analytics person. But because you have the maturity, you have the communication skills, you've been a professional before, those things weigh in where the younger crowd misses out. So they're not experienced, they're not mature, they panic quickly under pressure. So you use those soft skills and you use your data analytics and understanding, and you combine those two and platform your career again. So you start at the bottom, but you grow faster because of those soft skills supporting you. So it's not like you cannot start again and grow. It takes time, it takes commitment. But again, if you're entering this field, you need to make some sacrifices like every other field.
Perfect. And how important are marks in getting into the industry? And I'm going to assume that they mean marks academically. Tahira, do you want to start us off with this one?
Sure. So I can't speak specific to, I guess, data analytics broadly, but I can speak more specific to like where I've worked. I would say in my experience, especially where I am now, when I look at hiring new grads out of university, at least on the engineering side, I'm looking for aptitude and attitude more than anything, because we need people who need a bit of understanding and that aptitude and that experience so that they can start from at least a base level. But I'm never looking for someone to be a full expert, because I'm expecting that people are going to come with the attitude of wanting to learn and being able to adapt. And I could have someone who's super skilled at that junior level, but if they're not willing to do all the other stuff, or they have really poor attitude, that makes it really difficult. So I can't remember the last time I hired someone just based off their GPA. Like, I would say the GPA matters, that I know that you took it seriously, but just because you have a 4.0 GPA doesn't mean that you're necessarily qualified, because paper is one thing, but reality is totally different.
I would slightly like to contrast that, because see, when I was hiring at Freshly, when I sent out a job posting, I got over 600 resumes. Now it's not possible for me to interview all 600 people. So what I'm trying to do when I'm screening those resumes is I'm trying to find points that I can use to interview those people and shortlist them. Certainly, GPA is one thing that talks about intelligence, and in this field, intelligence is required at a certain extent. So, and intelligence comes with math and computer science skills, as well as communication skills. So like GPA gives me that, kind of reason to invite someone for an interview, that, hey, if somebody has a 3.98 GPA or 4 GPA from Waterloo, this person is generally smart. I want to talk to him, see if he has those capabilities that I can groom to be a manager or a senior manager in the future. So I think that's so it's like whenever you're looking at resumes, you're presenting yourself, you're marketing yourself. Now, when you're marketing a product, you would know that there has to be a unique selling proposition, and you need to find what's your unique selling proposition that somebody would invite you for an interview. GPA is one of those amongst many. Sometimes there's extracurricular that stand out. Sometimes it's some of the projects that you've done. Like, for example, if you're a 3 GPA from Waterloo, but if you've worked on Event Horizon Telescope, which mapped the black hole, I would say this person is really smart because he's part of that crowd. Now, we had someone like that in our undergrad, that he was a 3 GPA holder, but he was working in his undergrad with Microsoft on the Xbox development. So he would get invited to all interviews, because when we write that I'm part of the core development team of Xbox at Microsoft while I'm an undergrad student, that would just get him invited to any interview he applies to anywhere in the world. So I think those are kind of you need to build those selling points. And I think those go a long way, and it can be a combination of a few things. But if you don't have anything else, then certainly GPA gives you that excuse that you can highlight yourself.
Yeah, to build on everything that was just said, it's not an easy yes or no. It depends on the role that you're applying to. It depends on the hiring manager. It depends on the industry. Certainly, there are some people who I can ask them to write an algorithm on a whiteboard and they'll do it. And when I punch it into the computer, it compiles and runs perfectly the first time. And that this person would be very good for a very specific part of the job or for a very specific role. But there are lots of different kinds of jobs out there. I personally was a solid B or maybe even a B+ student. I was not on the dean's list. I was not at the top of my class. But my first job out of school was working for a software consulting company. And, certainly I knew my way around writing a program, no problem. But I think what probably got me the job was the fact that they knew they could put me in front of clients and they could send me down to the site and it would be fine. And I could train users and these kinds of things on the stuff that we were building. So it's not a simple yes or no. You really have to take a sort of stock of all the skills and all the assets that you have and play to your strengths.
Perfect. So we're at the end of the hour. So we'll end off by just thanking our panelists for joining us today. I think we've had some very informative discussions and some very valuable information. Also want to thank our organizers for setting up this great opportunity. I think I'm sure our audience has enjoyed as well. So we'll thank the audience for joining us as well. As we end today's session, at the end, there should be a survey that will come up as soon as the session closes. And we'd really appreciate any feedback that you have for us that can go towards improving future sessions. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you on the next webinar.